Let's talk about a couple things. First of all, should we just do camera right off the bat?
Start with camera.
Might as well.
I know David has a lot of takes off the camera.
takes.
Yeah.
Okay. My general overall take that we can pick apart is they are over processing a bit. And you look at a lot of the photos and it takes a 10 out of 10 photo sometimes, and it takes weirdly a below average, like 7 out of 10 photo other times. And I feel like I can see the camera like with its potential. It's a 50 megapixel huge sensor taking in way more light. I can see that potential in a lot of the shots, but then the over processing and over HDR look that I get from it makes it look worse than it should. So in a lot of like totally normal average looking scenarios, it'll start peeling in like highlights and shadows that don't need to be pulled in, where in like the tough situation, like out the windshield of my car at night with the ultra wide wall moving, it'll be an incredible shot. I'm like, wow, this is an incredible camera. And that's the 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
But then the 7 out of 10 is like the normal shot where it over HDR stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking it can get better with software updates. Like I've seen really good shots in a lot of situations where a lot of phones can't compare. And so that makes me really like this camera, but it's gonna need a little bit of tweaking, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So the point of computational photography is to get around physical boundaries, to cheat physics, and in previous devices, smartphones have had some of the smallest sensors out of any camera, right? We kind of moved from these large format cameras down to this, and then we kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and smartphone cameras have traditionally been the smallest. One of the earliest examples of computational photography, portrait mode, right?
That's a great example.
It's grabbing the edges of a thing and creating a foreground and a background. And over time, they tried to create more than just a foreground and a background. They tried to create more depth levels in order to try to emulate the way that lenses actually work. That was all a stopgap until we got to bigger sensors in smartphones. And I think that is like one of the first examples. The other examples are like HDR and that kind of stuff. And those are the things that I think are becoming a problem. Now that smartphone sensors are getting so big, capturing so much light, and one of the things that a big sensor does is give you natural depth of field, and it also gives you more light capture.
Yeah, sometimes too much depth of field.
Right.
It'll get fringy and like a little bit like too wide open.
Right, we saw this on the S20 Ultra, and I think this is having a similar first generation problem, but not quite as bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also 2 software features that they added in the camera modes that are also both software tricks to simulate things you do with hardware. So you know that like action pan shot that you get where if like a car is driving by and you get your shutter speed just right and you turn the camera fast enough, you get the sharp subject and the blurred background. You can, in the Pixels action pan mode, hold still, let an object pass through the frame, take the shot, and it'll blur the background in the direction that the object is moving to create that effect. So it's, again, a software trick to do something you would have done with hardware. It's pretty smart and it's good. The other is long exposure mode. Same idea. You find like a waterfall or even like light streaks from car headlights at night, and you just hold still, take a quick exposure. You don't have to hold there for very long. It'll look at everything moving and go, okay, here's the direction they're moving, blur. And it just makes this cool long exposure effect. So we're getting a lot of Google smarts in that direction, which is like solving for not amazing hardware.
Yeah, don't forget about the thing with the faces, where the face is blurry. It will take a photo with the wide angle camera at a faster shutter speed and then superimpose it.
Yeah, it's always running a higher, faster shutter speed with the ultra wide, and if it notices blurry faces, it will stitch in the sharper face from the ultra wide into the regular shot. It's good stuff.
One of my favorite things about yearly Pixel launches is that they almost always introduce some new crazy computational photography mode that you're just like, you weren't even thinking of. Like the Astro mode in the Pixel 4 is literally just an extension of HDR, the way that they originally created HDR with stacking and that kind of stuff, and like realigning that stuff. This year was definitely very cool. The funny thing is, like, some of the earliest use cases for machine learning, especially in photography, has been like object identification and knowing what an object is, because you're just comparing hundreds of thousands of objects against each other and then coming up with a tighter and tighter confidence interval. And so the thing like the action pan is built on top of that, right? Because you're saying, this is the car. This is exactly where I'm going to sketch out the car to be. Everything else is going to have like a blur effect.
Yeah. And we'll talk about Magic Eraser in a second, but I think that is one of the most interesting approaches to doing a camera. There's been a lot of Huawei phones I've noticed in the past that have like an AI camera mode. You turn on, I think it's on by default actually.
Yeah.
And it will
scene detection.
It will, yeah, exactly. Scene detection, and it'll notice like hundreds of different varieties of things and adjust the shot according to how it thinks you want it. And that's the common theme I've noticed with all of these is it's adjusting the shot based on how it thinks you want it. It sees grass on the ground, we'll bump that grass up to be more green. Oh, you're taking a landscape shot, we're gonna make the sky more blue here. Oh, you're taking a shot of your dog, we're gonna bump the contrast and the sharpness here. Versus maybe Apple's approach with photographic styles, which is like, here's a rich contrast one if you want that. Here's a vibrant one if you want that. Here's a warm one. Here's a cool one. And I think the Pixel is just doing the good old-fashioned make everything bright and contrasty and hope you like that every time.
Yeah.
And I think it would win the blind smartphone test for the first time.
Because bright and contrasty is like what people generally like.
Yeah, but I don't know that the enthusiast photographer in us actually likes that more.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Something that Mark Lavoie, who was the former head of computational photography for Pixel at Google, now is at Adobe, told me when I interviewed him a few years ago was, we're not trying to make a camera in the Pixel, we're trying to make a magic imaging box. You press a button and everything just gets done for you. That's why traditionally the Pixel camera's UI has been really stripped of any additional settings. And actually, if you want to change settings for Pixel UI, I think they've rolled that back a little bit, but most of the photo camera settings have been in the settings menu, not in the camera app itself.
Sounds kind of like a little closer to the Apple approach before we got the photographic styles.
Before photographic styles, that's the thing, is like, I feel like they want to minimize the interaction because they just want you to be able to like take out your phone, open the camera, double tap, or like tap on the screen. Kind of going back to the way that you said that it's like a 7 out of 10 a lot of the time, sometimes a 10 out of 10. Our theory for this is that Google's used the same sensor in like almost all its Pixels. 2 through 5, exact same sensor. Pixel 1, almost exactly the same as 2. Actually slightly bigger photo sites, which was interesting. They like went backwards. But they had to, like we said before, the point of computational photography is to make up for the physical boundaries in a device. And so Google kind of figured out like, okay, well, HDR is something that you can't really get with a small sensor naturally because you're brightening things a lot, right? You're like bringing up the shadows and you're lowering the highlights and then also contrast and sharpening. And generally when you have a crappy sensor, contrast and sharpening kind of allow an image to look a little bit better than it normally would if it was like out of a blurry 3 megapixel like feature phone.
Yeah, but it'll start to look a little more processed.
Exactly. Yeah. So they did this for years and everyone like was like, the Pixel camera is amazing, the Pixel camera is amazing. Every single year they got more intense with the HDR. And I think that was the wrong move personally. Like, yes, you can see more detail in the shadows and yes, you can retain more highlights, but the point of like contour and contrast is what gives images depth. And at some point, people start to look like zombies because it lifts the shadows in their face. They look dead. Grass starts to look gray. Like everything sort of starts to look gray.
Yeah.
And now we have this new 50 megapixel sensor, which like you said earlier is a 12.5. I heard something about it's a physical bin instead of a software bin. And that's the reason that you can't like switch it to full 50 megapixels.
I don't understand that.
I don't understand that either.
If it's a 50 megapixel, isn't it not a 50 megapixel sensor then? If you can never, ever, ever get a 50 megapixel image from it?
My guess is that Apple bought up all the good 12 megapixel large sensors. And,
oh, wow.
Yeah. And so then they had to go with whatever was available. And if it's a Sony or a Samsung, Sony and Samsung like to just be like, look how high resolution our smartphone sensors are. But now they've got this huge sensor. And we did all this testing, right? I was like, okay, if you shoot raw photos out of the Pixel, because you can.
Right, this was good. Yeah.
There's a RAW plus JPEG mode. You can also use like the Lightroom camera app and shoot raw. Then you can compare what this sensor is actually capable of versus what Google is doing in the processing.
Yeah.
We shot raw. When you shoot raw, it's really flat. It's like log. you bump the vibrance to sort of bring color back to people's skin. Yeah. I was going to go on a tangent between vibrance and saturation, which is very confusing, but I won't do that. So
contrast curves.
Yeah. So if you bump the vibrance back up, you kind of see like, okay, overall quality of this image sensor, what is it? And you can see the amount of processing that Google is doing makes these images look like a Pixel 2, Pixel 3, Pixel 4, more like a Pixel 5 photo because of how much processing they're doing to the HDR. But over sharpened, over contrasty, the way that it's processing into a JPEG makes the skin break down, makes the eyes break down, pulls all of the highlights out of any highlight, pulls all the shadows up. And it also does some like distortion correction. We took this photo of Adam's face where on the raw, it looks like his face. It looks good. But on the pixel photo, it's like almost, it doesn't look wrong, but he looks different. Like he looks like a different person.
It's like reality went through a black box, and out the other side, you got this really shiny, like impressive photo on a phone screen. But when you start to blow it up or start to want to edit it yourself, it's actually not as good as the original.
Right.
I think a sweet spot would have been right in the middle. And I don't know if that's the way they think about cameras, where like, oh, we want to appease the enthusiast and give them a little bit of a flatter image. No, they're trying to win the blind smartphone test. They're trying to give
enthusiasts don't make money. Yeah,
I get it. I hate that I like care about this so much because I know that it's probably the opposite opinion.
The thing is, though, if you really think about it, they kind of nailed it because the enthusiast is going to be able to take a raw photo and do what they want with it and get what's needed out of it because they all know how to do it. Whereas the point and click is going to be exactly for the regular people.
But like if you look what's capable out of this sensor, it looks so good. It looks like almost like a medium format camera image because of the proportions of the size of the sensor to the lens. Like it's crazy.
The problem just is the people who are buying it arguably aren't going to notice that difference, or they're going to see like we've proved with the smartphone test that sharper, brighter is going to be perceived as better.
I totally understand that their probably counterpoint is like 95% of people view all their photos on their phone.
Yep.
And that is true. And I totally understand. I just see the capabilities out of this phone because I blew them up on the Pro Display XDR and they look amazing. I could have taken that on the Hasselblad like camera and it's like, it's crazy.
Yeah, that I think is kind of tied into the whole idea of what Pixel is this year, which is they're trying to make a phone for everybody this year. I mean, we've seen the enthusiast market, and it's sort of like Pixel has always been the example of what an Android phone would be. You can buy it if you want. Some people bought it, whoop-de-doo, Google Store, maybe a couple other places. But now it's just like, oh yeah, we're going to run commercials for this for months. We're going to share this with as many people as possible. And this is our big shot at like giving people a third option after iPhone and Samsung.
Yeah.
That's a very different approach from what Pixel has been in the past. And maybe the camera sort of tilted in that direction as a result. Yeah. I still think they can update it a little bit in software. I'm holding out hope. We'll see.
I don't think they will, but I will also hold out hope.
We'll see. I'm optimistic.
Woof, woof.
What a good sport. He just woke up from a power nap. You can tell. You can see it in his eyes, the power nap.
At least he didn't bark.
Mac would like you to subscribe to the Clips channel, in case you haven't seen this.
Let's just go straight to Clips.
Also, the Clips channel officially surpassed the main channel.
Thank you.
Clip channel
now
supremacy.
Go subscribe to the main channel.
Subscribe, please.
You're not watching our entire conversation that lasts over an hour? Are you even human?
Come hang out on both
Max
channels.
says no. Subscribe.
How long are we going to do this for?
Subscribe.
All right, boys.
There it is.
We're done.